Welcome to HCD Podcast Mindset, the go-to destination for all things behavioral science, neuromarketing, and consumer research. I'm your host, Michelle Nigella, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today for a conversation to spark your curiosity and leave you with a wealth of insights. In today's exciting episode, we speak with Tessa Moxley, a seasoned sensory and consumer research scientist who's left her mark at CPG industry giants Reckitt and Dyson. With a background in mechanical engineering and a passion for innovation, Tessa delves into the intricate world of multisensory consumer experiences, particularly in the realm of fragrance. Join us as we explore her pioneering methodologies and insights into how smell influences our daily lives and behaviors. Before we dive into this, a quick call to action to take a moment to like and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And a reminder to check out more resources available like white papers, conference presentations, and other great content on our website at www.hcdi.net. So let's get going. Whether you're commuting, working out, or just relaxing, let's embark on another journey of knowledge and discovery right here on HCD's Mindset. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Mindset podcast series. My name is Michelle Nigella, and I am super thrilled to be here with my good friend Tessa Moxley, and we're going to be talking a bit about her career. She is a mechanical engineer, but she is also a sensory and consumer research scientist. And so we're going to hear a bit about her experiences about innovation and new methodologies and the sensory experiences that consumers have and how that can benefit them. So, Tessa, without further ado, say hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. So this will be a really fun conversation. You and I have had some time to work together over the past few years, and with your work at Reckitt, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And we've had some interesting adventures where we actually got to go to different conferences and present our work. So there's some
We
things we
have.
can talk about and definitely some things that we can't. But you've had a really interesting background. So you're a mechanical engineer.
Yeah, that's correct. So I think, a lot of people, I don't think anyone really comes into consumer research that I've met yet through some kind of standard pathway. I think everyone has gone through kind of starting off at all sorts of different areas in their career and different things studying at university and so on. And then you end up stumbling across this world of consumer research, which is certainly what happened to me. So yeah, my background is engineering. I very much thought I was going to be a mechanical engineer. And then it was I just stumbled across consumer research and then I stumbled into sensory science. It really felt like that. But when you find it, you found something that really clicks for you. That moment where you're like, oh, this whole world exists and I never knew it was here and it's just so great.
That's a
So
that's a really funny point. I find a lot of times, like let's say you're on an airplane and you're sitting next to someone and they say, "What do you do?" And I try to say, that I do consumer science. Nobody actually knows what that is, right? So
yeah,
maybe it was even harder for you to describe in a way coming from mechanical engineering. So I guess let's take a step back and say,
yeah.
why did you go into mechanical engineering?
So I think if we go, I guess, way, way back to like childhood, me growing up, I was not one of these people who necessarily knew what I wanted to do. In fact, I still kind of don't really know. I'm still just following what's interesting to me. I think someone gave me that advice once and I've just followed it and it seems to be working so far.
That's great advice.
Um, yeah. And I always felt like I had this, like half of me was kind of creative, and then the other half of me, like I wanted to be like painting at the weekends and sewing and these types of things. And then the other half of me was like really enjoyed maths, numbers, rules, that type of space, kind of more like logical. And I think growing up, I was made to believe that those two things, there wasn't really an area where they could
Mm.
come together. It was like you kind of got to choose one or the other. And I think it was also made quite clear to me through my education that following the creative path would lead to, you know, um, not great job prospects, and you're going to end up kind of hating it in the end. And so you should really go for this kind of maths side. So thought, okay, I'll go into maths and I'll just do some painting and at the weekends. And so that's kind of what I was doing with engineering. So I studied mechanical engineering. Then I was specializing in my master's in manufacturing. So I learned a
Okay.
lot about 3D printing. Really, really interesting. And that is quite creative actually, which I think is what drove me to get more into the 3D printing side of things. But I never felt, I was always surrounded by people who were like, I could see the passion that they had towards these things, and I
Mm,
was missing that. I was like, I'm good at this. I like it. Kind of makes sense, but um, I'm not like wanting to have my own 3D printer at home, for
yeah.
example, and go off and do that. Like it was something. It was more of a interesting, but not making my heart like really go for it, if you know what I mean.
That's
So,
really funny that you say that because like a neighbor of mine, a good friend, he's also a mechanical engineer and he has a
oh
3D
yeah,
printer at home.
there
So
you
it's very funny
go.
you mentioned that specifically because he finds reasons to print things all the
Yeah,
time. Like he'll, see some sort of random problem, it'll be like, "Oh, I can develop something to print for that," and then
yeah,
he immediately goes and prints some bizarrely shaped plastic block, and it solves some
yeah,
very specific problem. But yes.
yeah. Exactly. And so I was surrounded by people. And then when I went into working at Dyson as a mechanical engineer, it was the same. I was always surrounded by people who were like at home, they were tinkering with their own bikes. I worked on filters for a while. Filters are really interesting.
Mm,
There's a lot that goes on with the extraction of dust particles from the air, and there's a lot of science behind it. It's actually fascinating. Dust is
yeah.
actually really interesting. Just take my word for it. But I wouldn't get home and be like, "I can't wait to read these extra papers in my spare time about dust." Like, I
Mm,
didn't have that. It was like a work thing rather than a passion that consumed my whole life. And then that's when it changed. When I went into consumer research, I was like, I'm actually just so interested in this whole topic. It
yeah.
becomes work and hobbies and external interests.
Mhm.
And but
I describe that a
yeah,
lot to people, especially when I talk to people who have started to retire from the sensory and consumer research space. They don't actually retire. Like, they retire and they say they're gonna do all these things, but honestly, they keep going to the conferences and they keep writing
yeah,
papers, and I joke with them that it's because work is your hobby, right?
yeah. Yeah, that's when you know that you were in the right space. When you retire, but you are still wanting to go to the conferences and see what's the latest tech and what, you know, the industry players or academic people are doing, like you have real interest there. And I think that's what you should really strive towards because we spend so much of our time at work.
Yeah.
So when you find something like that, you found your
Mhm.
thing. Like too many people hate their jobs and spend a lot of their
So was
hours
your
of their
first
life
job
committed
in the
to it.
dust?
Pardon?
Was your first job in the dust?
My first job at Dyson was in the motors and drives team. So it was gearboxes, motors, this type of thing. Then I went into the filters team. That
Okay.
was about
So both
extracting dust
very
from air.
engineering jobs.
Exactly, exactly. And so how the transition happened into consumer research was, and I owe a lot to this individual. He was a head of my department in the filtration team. And we were just having a chat once. I was very open with him about the fact that, for now this is great, but this isn't like something I absolutely adore doing. And I was still really searching for that thing and felt a little bit like I didn't know what I was going to do with my career. And he said, "Oh, there's this team that do kind of consumer research." And I was like, "I have no idea what that is, but that sounds interesting." And basically, just based on his recommendation, I kind of began the process of transferring over into that team. And then once I'd found it and the more I learned, I was like, this is, I just didn't even think, like you were saying your example before, people just don't think
Yeah.
that it goes on. And I think that's what makes it hard for people in this area when they're asked the question at like you said, you sit next to someone, it's, on a
Yeah.
plane or someone wants like a short elevator pitch of what do you do?
Yep.
And the first thing you have to do is explain to them that this world of work exists and then you have to explain to them what your part is in that world. So, like most people, you don't need to start from like that far back. But with this, you have to really
You
be
have
like,
to.
so there's actually people that research this, and there's actually quite a lot of them. And I'm one of them. And then within that whole space, there's obviously lots of different, there's like the sensory stuff, or there's, the stuff that we were doing at Dyson was more um I guess experimental consumer research techniques. So you've got like the more bread and butter stuff, that the like the traditional techniques. You've got like lots of different players within. You've got people who really specialize in quant, qual, etc. And that is like, by the time I've explained that to people, their eyes have glazed over. They just wanted a short answer. They don't want
Right.
me to be going on and on. So
Yeah, you
I've
have to,
started
like,
just
kinda gauge people a little bit. I know, sometimes I'll try to really describe it, and I usually use shampoo as the example because everybody uses shampoo, and so I'll say, "Oh, you know how shampoo has a smell?" And they'll say, "Yeah." And I'll say, "Well, you know that that smell is carefully chosen to match the brand and the purpose, and you have to ask consumers that, like, that's what we do." But then
yeah.
sometimes you're sitting next to someone, maybe it's like a grandmother and she doesn't hear very well. And she's like, "What do you do, dearie?" And I'll say, "I'm a neuroscientist." And she'll say, "Nursing?" And I'll say, "Yes."
Yeah. I've done that. I've done that. I hold my hand. I've definitely done that. Especially like my grandmas. I don't know if they know what I do. I think one thinks I still do engineering. She was so proud to have like a female engineer in the family. I just don't think I could
Oh,
break it to her that I'm no longer an engineer. So I'm like, yeah, yeah, I
but you're
still do
always an
that. Yeah.
engineer. Like you have the training.
It's true. That's true. So I'm not technically lying to her, but I think describing the world of consumer research might be a little bit of a stretch. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think when people hear the brand name Dyson, they immediately think of like crazy innovations, or this is what I think at least. I
Mm,
think of like really outside the box thinking and design, like heavy on the
yeah.
design side. Was that your experience? Is that what you were thinking when you were going in to your job first going to Dyson?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was applying, I was thinking everything that you think, that everything that you just said, I think is the common perception of Dyson and how it's going to be on the inside. And I had all of that. I was very much excited to be going into this like forefront of innovation. Who knows what they're working on next, So, couldn't believe my luck really when I got a job there. It was, and I'd actually worked there a little bit through university as well. So,
Okay.
um, in total, I worked quite a long time at Dyson, and like I said, I worked there as an engineer and then also on the consumer
Mm,
research side. So I felt like I really got to see a lot of um, kind of exposure to different areas within the development process, if we say, like further downstream or how they do
mm.
innovation. Yeah,
I think that's a really interesting topic as well because you're talking about these 2 very different worlds. One being a field that people don't even really know exists, being consumer research, and then the one that people are more accustomed to when they think of product development, which is the engineers or the scientists that are thinking about the technology or the ingredients or whatever it might be, and that you
yeah,
develop this product. Um, but it's all these teams that have to work together. And that's a
yeah.
very cross-functional, mixed way to think about things. How do you think that sort of works when you have these very different groups? You have a group of engineers and you have, this group of consumer insights people. Um,
Mm.
how do you think that that communication works?
So I think this is something that Dyson did really well, was that the teams were really well embedded. So Dyson is like technology first. Um, it's all about, when you're there, it really is all about, let's try and let's really put our hardcore innovation hats on
Mm,
and try and get together. And if we're not really sure how we're going to turn this into a product that's going to make us money, but we're going to try and do some experiments on technology that hasn't been done before, or look out for a technology in a kind of completely different world, which we can then take and put into the types of products which Dyson plays in. And we'll deal with how it can make us money kind of later, but let's just really, like, there was a lot of really amazing scientists there who were actually given the freedom and space to just explore. And the consumer insights team is was I would say, relative to other um, companies and teams that I've seen, the way that which they're set up, I think at Dyson they were very closely integrated.
Mm,
So there wouldn't really be brainstorms going on without the voice of the consumer. There'd
okay.
always be someone there. It was like a hand in hand situation. If I was doing research trials, we would have members from the engineering team who are working on those same vacuum cleaners
Mm,
there, like on the other side of I never know if it's a one-way mirror or a two-way mirror, but you know,
yeah,
like looking and observing, because there's nothing more powerful than actually seeing firsthand and not being told by someone like me, by the way, the ergonomics of the machine didn't work very well when we had like the elderly consumers come into the test. Like, if they can just see it, they don't
yeah,
need to be told. They see the struggles, or they see the elements of the design which are working well. They see if people are like struggling with certain things. So, and doing home visits and things, it would never be just something which was isolated and kept within consumer insights. It was always like, we guide, we set things up,
mm,
but the engineers have to be part of every step, and because it's them who needs to actually put it into practice
right.
on the technology side. So we might know everything about the Dyson consumers, but we're not doing our jobs well if we can't get that across to them. So
Yeah,
I think
that's
that
a
that
really
was some
actually actionable insights, right? Something
Yeah,
that they can take
definitely.
away and like fix or develop something for.
Yeah. But it's not always like that. Sometimes there are these huge disconnects.
Mm,
And I think we've spoken about this before. A big one is often like the R&D side versus the marketing side.
yeah.
And then where consumer insights fits into that, because we might do a research study which has valuable elements to both of those things. Like, you're talking about the shampoo,
Yeah.
like that, the scent needs to match, the whole product experience needs to be cohesive and all singing to the same tune. But sometimes these teams within companies are like miles apart and
Mm,
not necessarily speaking to each other. So you can end up with this product at the end which smells like this thing, feels like this, and the
yeah.
marketing is over here. And it's like, okay, so what,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Individually, they all might test well, right?
Hmm.
So like, oh, this is great packaging, this is great messaging, this is a great everybody loves this fragrance. Um,
Yeah.
but if it doesn't all harmonize together and tell a cohesive story, then the consumer's like, "What is this?"
What is
You
this?
know?
Yeah, yeah. Why is it like an apple fragrance in like a pink bottle? Like, what? How is that? Like,
Right.
things like that, can end up happening where you've not got teams talking to each other.
And
But
that's like a whole whole 'nother world. So, like, consumer research is an odd thing for people to know about because nobody knows that it's actually a thing. And if they do, great, but they're even less likely to know about sensory,
yeah, yeah,
right?
that's true.
So,
But
how did you then get into sensory? Like, what was that trip like?
yeah, so the world of sensory came into kind of my life through some of the people that were, like I said, the team at Dyson, which was my first experience of consumer research team, was filled with these amazing mixed bag of professionals who would, I think we had like a marine biologist in there. We had like all
Oh
sorts
my.
of people
Yeah.
for, yeah, it was really amazing. Everyone was bringing together like such different skill sets. But we did have some people who were like more like the more sort of hardcore sensory world, and they'd come
Mm.
over into Dyson. And then I was like, oh, what's that? That's interesting. And obviously, at the time, within the type of scope of products which Dyson was manufacturing, the sensory opportunities, like smell and taste specifically, were limited. We did some really cool auditory stuff, but um, there's only so much that job could offer in that space. And so I think then I started thinking, what's this other world? Because
Mm.
I'd kind of just a few years prior gone from engineering across into consumer research, but I was like still really keen to, I knew there was more much, much more out there that I felt perhaps I couldn't explore within the confines of that role. So then
Mm,
when the role in FMCG came up over a Reckitt, I thought, wow, that's going to allow me to not completely leave behind the stuff I was doing, but just build on it. And the world of smell, I mean, I'm so glad I found it, early on in my career, because that was another huge like light bulb moment for me where I think it's super, super fascinating. And again, I definitely still feel like I'm just scratching the surface, but I'm glad I found it. It's just got so much going on. It's just so complicated. And I
yeah.
think some things there's quite a clear way of testing. So some research problems, some particular products, there's like to understand. Um, you don't need to necessarily like be inventing new methods to understand certain types of cues, certain sensory attributes, but smell is not mastered. That's what's so exciting about it. It's not yet, it's still very much like how we actually conduct tests
Yeah.
is still, you go to conferences and people are still exploring all sorts of new ways in which like context can be brought into the testing and different things like this. So I think that's what makes it so exciting, is that it's very much not, it's not like something that's done and dusted. People are still really struggling to properly conduct consumer research um, on olfactory cues from a product. And so you want to
Yeah.
be somewhere where you can be exploring new methods, bringing something new to the table. And I think that's the space definitely has that.
Yeah, olfaction is so interesting because it is underappreciated, I think, by humans in general. Um, we ran a study with, I collaborated with some scientists at Monell, and we did basically a global survey asking people which was more important of the senses. And the way we were asking people is, what would you rather lose? Your sense of taste or your sense of touch or your sense of smell or your vision, but also commodities. So would you rather lose your cell phone or, your ability to taste? And so
Yeah,
running this whole like gamut of things, it turns out that smell is very low on
yeah,
people's priorities. And yet it's so important. It's important for safety, and it's so heavily linked with memory and how we
yeah.
perceive products. So, what do you think has been kind of like some key lessons you've learned about the importance of fragrance in, the consumer experience?
Yeah, yeah, I remember seeing that study and being shocked. But there's some people that definitely, just to touch on it, there's some people who I think there's a small group of people who do realize
Yeah.
the importance of scent. And sometimes you stumble across them in your day-to-day life and you mention that I'm in that area, and you can see that they are like, they're a fragrance enthusiast. They really are like very switched on to scent in their environment. um, but then most people, unfortunately, it's impacting them all the time, but they
Yeah.
are completely not aware of it at all. And I think
And
it's
some
very
people go
good.
the opposite way, right? They want fragrance-free everything because they think it's going to be healthier. There's an interesting study um,
Yeah,
that was done out of Rutgers, the sort of psychology of emotion and fragrance, and kind of calling the whole fragrance-free movement as being sort of sensory deprivation. That
right.
when you have more of these buildings that are very air conditioned and very sealed and have like very strong filters. We're bringing up filters again. But trying to keep everything so sterile, right?
Mm,
And you end up in a sort of sensory deprived situation. And that can
yeah.
affect your emotions and well-being.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen research that looks at people who have lost their sense of smell, um, and it can have a really serious impact on your well-being, basically, and your quality of life. It's very much like a you don't know what you've got until it's gone type of situation, I think, where it's like you said, really underappreciated, unfortunately.
And it
Um,
kind of came to the forefront with COVID, right? Where people started losing their sense of smell, and it really impacted them, maybe only for a short time, but perhaps it kind of like called attention.
Definitely, definitely. Which is a good thing, a silver lining of COVID, that it made people more aware. But, like, I think the best research that I've done, which helps to show the importance, because all these things, like we've seen, there's so much research out there that shows the importance of your sense of smell. But I think sometimes within like an R&D setting, uh, within say like FMCG, that, saying that if somebody loses a sense of smell, their well-being, quality of life might decline. That's quite far removed from like the products, the day to day. So I think the best way in which you can like bring the power of smell to life is in there's a couple of like, examples that I personally lean on quite a lot. And I think most people that, you said you have your shampoo as your kind of lean
Yeah.
on example for when someone's asking about like what that world is. I think I have the same, like within work, I have a handful of examples which are really quick and easy to explain,
Mhm.
but are like, oh, did you know that if we ran an experiment and we changed the scent smell to X to Y, and we just observed people's behavior and it changed in this way. And that's just such an easy thing
Yeah.
to say, and people suddenly go, ah, okay, sense of smell has this like hidden power to change how people behave with products without you needing to do any extra marketing, without you needing to really spend any
Right.
money. It's like a cue which we can tweak and optimize within a product to get to where we want to be, to have people's experience in line with what we want it to be. um, and often it's something which isn't like fully utilized or fully optimized within the
Mm.
product because people don't know like how much of an impact it could be having.
And that's a really interesting question. So, sort of a topic that has been in the sensory field for a long time is how can we get sensory a seat at the table? That table being sort of the upper management decision making for a brand or for a product.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel sensory science plays a role in the development of a consumer product?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's really hard. I don't think at the moment, from what I've seen, sensory has a solid a solid seat, a firm, guaranteed seat at the table. Sometimes it has a seat, sometimes when it's like an obvious link to
Yeah.
there being a sensory element in that decision. Um, but a lot of the time, if it's a decision that's being made about something which isn't clearly linked to the sensory attributes of the product, then why would sensory need to be in on those discussions and those decisions? But to what we were saying earlier about that harmony element,
Mm.
that's when it falls down if you don't have the right people just part of the conversation and seeing. So like marketing, so why would sensory need to be included in marketing type of conversations and decisions? But they do,
Yeah.
because everything has to be in harmony with each other. So I'm not saying that like sensory is everything. Everyone just needs to be better connected and talking to each other. You need to have like marketing. I think members from marketing teams should be brought further upstream into sensory related conversations so that they can then say, oh, but we had these plans for the marketing elements of this. Are they going to fit with the sensory attributes that you're talking about? So
Yeah.
it's like a two-way. It's not just sensory going out telling everyone what they should be doing, of course. Everyone needs to be interconnected, from talking back to Dyson, from the kind of more technical engineers onto marketing, and then people within consumer insights are in, I guess, quite a nice decision, uh, a nice sort of like um, location where they can bridge the gap and bring people together. I think that's something else that I've seen consumer insights folk having a massive impact. And I think people who I really look up to, they are the people who not only are doing consumer insights, but they're also basically translators across
Oh,
the
yeah.
business. They're like being that like gap bridging person, marketing, technical formulas, and the chemists over the road. Like everyone needs to be part of these discussions.
Yeah. And I guess an interesting part of that with that whole balance of thinking of all the inputs that are going into a product, which again, I think general public doesn't even realize that, every product they buy has all these different hands in its
Mm,
creation. There is a balance that has to happen between the functionality of the product and the appeal. And I
yeah.
think sensory kind of rides that line a little bit on functionality and appeal. Um, can you maybe discuss that importance of that balance between balancing the functionality of the product and maybe like the sensory appeal for a successful product?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the thing that comes to mind in this is as kind of a good um, product linked to that balancing act is where you've got a product which is, say, in a cleaning space. It needs to the function of it is to, say, disinfect, but the sensory side is to have people perceive that disinfection is occurring. And I think some people who I've had discussions with about kind of the area that the type of sensory science that I've been working on at FMCG might see it as, well, it just needs to actually do the disinfecting. The functional
Yeah.
side is like up here in hierarchy, and sensory side is somewhere down here because, it's more about it actually disinfecting. But the thing is that people's behavior is so linked to the sensory experience that actually, if you don't have the right sensory cues for them to
Mhm.
trigger throughout their behavior and use the product in the right way, you don't actually get the disinfecting that you need in the end.
Yeah.
So you need people to be reassured. Or else they're not going to use it. They're not going to use it in the right way. They might start doing a kind of creative self mix, if we say, of products at home because they don't believe that your product is disinfecting.
Yeah.
So you can run into like all sorts of, and if you start mixing things in the cupboard,
Oh,
certain
yeah.
things can have, quite severe chemical reactions going on, which people are not necessarily, if you've got a product that really works on the functionality side, help the sensory, help you get them to use
Mm.
the product in the right way to maximize the overall function of the product. Another thing is, wastage. If you
Mm.
have the right sensory cues in there, they're going to use the right amount of that product. You don't need them to
Mm.
use more because it's not smelling strong enough, or
Yeah.
less because it smells so strong and harsh that they're actually scared to kind of be breathing in the space around the
Yeah.
product.
That's a really
So,
interesting point there because I think the question we usually ask is just about right. Yeah, right, when you're doing
yeah,
consumer research, but, like, just about right can be interpreted in a lot of ways, and so I think an interesting spin on just about right might be just about right for believing that it's actually going to do what it needs to do, right? Like
yeah,
a
yeah,
podcast.
yeah, exactly. Like, I think just about right as well can be a tricky one. A lot of people, I think, well, you get very high scores of that middle just about right point. And because just about right is quite a broad umbrella term for some
Yeah.
people. So I've seen in some cases exactly right used, but then
Mm,
exactly right, I think some people interpret as it's the same thing with like lots of scale discussions that go on. People interpret these things in different ways. So what is the exact right way of answering that question? Um, but I think, yeah, I think you can you if somebody says just about right, you never actually know without further questions whether they're saying, they believe it. It's just about right for what intention? Like, let's say, oh,
right.
the scent of this product, the strength of the scent is just about right for preference or for believing that this is harsh enough
Yeah,
to kill
which could be
the
very different.
really exactly like all the germs within your house, or to make it kind of to make the surface um so clean that you could eat off of it,
Yeah,
that sort of level, and you don't
but then the
necessarily
difference
get
too
that with
between
expression.
if we're talking about, say, lemon, which is a very popular fragrance for cleaning, right? The just
Hmm.
about right lemon for bathroom is very different than kitchen. Right.
Yeah, 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 exactly. This is what's so interesting about fragrance. It's like the room changes things, it's and then also your perception of a smell is a combination of the chemical in the bottle and also all of your past experiences that you're bringing to the table in that moment as you smell that scent, which is extremely personal.
Yeah.
So, to your example of like the lemon for the kitchen versus lemon for bathroom, also lemon for kitchen for mum is going to be kind of a different
Mm,
experience to lemon in the kitchen for kind of a child who's maybe not experienced so many harsh smelling cleaning products in their life and maybe doesn't do the cleaning so much in general. So
uh,
you've got like all this stuff going on where never someone's perception of a fragrance is never going to be the same as anyone else's,
mhm.
which again is super fascinating about the area.
And very much, involving context. And I think that, something that you've kind of brought up here is belief. So, like, believing that something works, and I think an example we use a lot is the Listerine effect, right? Which is
Yeah,
if it doesn't burn, it's not working, which is
yeah,
kinda similar to that if it doesn't smell strong enough or it doesn't burn your nose, then it's not actually killed anything, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely. But then
Sensory
you
can
ask
give you
someone that.
that reason to believe.
Exactly, exactly, it can. And it often is the thing that's doing that, even if you don't think that it is. It is subtly in the background. And without that, you ask someone, preference on Listerine products, they're not going to, tell you that they prefer, at least if the question is set up in a particular way where it's really talking about, likes and dislikes. The burn is not pleasant experience.
Right.
So, you're in the product development, Listerine's not been launched. You're asking people in a central location test, and they're going to tell you, no, this product burns, don't launch it. And so like we have those battles going on because we're working upstream in innovation and we're trying to understand, is it that we're asking the wrong question and setting the study up in the wrong way, and that actually if we launch this the burn is going to be great, or the equivalent of the burn, I'm just using that as an example, because those people must have done those tests and then they
Mhm.
went for it. And then look
Yeah.
at it, it's worked out really well. And now actually that burn is like a base level expectation of a product which is working.
Right. Right. Now to shift gears a little bit, I know that you spent a lot of time going to conferences in the past couple of years and especially for sensory. So in this industry, what are some current trends that you're seeing or that you're maybe particularly like excited about or, interested, intrigued by that you've sort
Yeah.
of seen in this area?
So I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but definitely context is something which I'm seeing more and more of. But people are tackling it in different ways. I think everyone agrees that there's a need to bring in more context to sensory testing, especially in the world of scent, where you have like I guess the typical way for anyone who is listening and isn't aware of maybe how fragrances would be tested is in a very much like a clean white boxed room, quite sterile, a central location test so people are coming in, it's not in their home, for example. Um, and I think that's control, but I'm doing this because it's not, it's a bit of an illusion of control, I think, in
Yeah.
reality, because people are where there's not the context cues. So you don't necessarily have the product or the branding or anything going on around you. You fill that in with whatever has happened to you within that day or, whatever past experiences you had, what's top of mind. You are projecting into that space as you smell that fragrance. So let's say it's like a fine fragrance or whatever, you're projecting lots of stuff into that experience, which we as researchers have taken out because we want it to be control and the same for everyone. But actually it's not, and it can increase your variability a lot. And so I've seen people, definitely there seems to be like a new wave of people like, how do we solve this? And I think a lot of people are focusing on VR. That
Yeah.
seems to be like maybe the past sort of 4 years. That's
Yeah.
been consistently, lots of posters at conferences.
But
There's
it's not very
certainly always
practical for consumer research, right?
no, yeah, it
Cost
definitely has its
wise
flaws.
and throughput wise. And
Yeah,
even in context, I think some of the research has shown such striking differences between VR context setting and, the 360 room sort of settings, or even
yeah,
asking people to imagine and then actual real life experiences, so in their own home, etc. They
yeah,
all of these can give you very different results.
yeah, I've seen that too. And what do you do in that case? Like,
Yeah.
um,
So
the
what do you
practical
see
bit.
happening? Like everybody's seeing this research at these conferences and everybody's very wowed, like, "Ooh, VR, that's amazing that you did
Yeah,
that. Very fancy."
yeah.
But in reality, what can companies do with that?
I think the projection rooms is something that is could be explored more. It's a little bit more basic,
Yeah.
but and it's not as flashy and as sexy. Maybe people like being able to say, "Oh, VR, yeah,"
Yeah.
or mixed reality, because you could have someone wearing a VR headset of them, say, in a bar, and then they're physically drinking, beer
Yeah.
along with it, so that it's like a half and half situation. But it's so clumsy. Like people can't, unless it's perfectly lined up, the person's attention is much more on the difference
Yes.
between, or the clumsiness
Mhm.
between this like virtual reality bar that they're meant to be in, and oh, I'm trying to like grab my beer but I can't see where it is, and then I'm trying to drink from the beer and with a virtual reality headset on, and
Yeah,
some
so
people
you're
can
probably
feel
gonna have to do it
dizzy in
with a
VR.
straw, and nobody drinks beer through a straw. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so I think there's maybe it would need to come a long way for that to be
Yeah.
useful. Right now I think let's lean on more, slightly more basic, but still a step on from a sterile room. So still bringing context. I mean, you brought up there, like just getting people in the right frame of mind. We don't do that enough, mentally priming people, setting
Mm.
people up in the right headspace. People come into a consumer test and they're going to be a little bit jarred if they've not done it before. They're
Yep.
not necessarily sure what they're doing. And then suddenly you're asking them about, a home fragrance or a beer or a chocolate bar or something. And they're used to consuming these in very different mental spaces than where they are in that moment. Um,
100%.
so I think that's something, projections rooms, I think, could be better utilized. But I also think what happened to, dressing up a room,
Right.
making a room, there is physical things you can do which make things a little bit closer towards real, putting a bit of background sound, though that's another thing because it's very, very eerie and quiet in a lot of these facilities. There's so many things that could be done.
Yeah.
Um, it's finding the time to do the research. So a lot of people doing the research on these, that's on the academia side. And then people from industry, they don't necessarily have the time to research the research method
Yes.
because they just need to do the research and get the answer yesterday.
Yeah.
So to then try and set up a study to then research a new method, or bringing in some background sound, or dressing up a consumer test room with, some clutter, so it's a little bit
Mhm.
more realistic. um that really needs to be, time needs to be spent on those things in industry, not just in academia.
Yeah. It can be a tough sell, right?
Yes, because you don't
Yeah.
get a sexy story at the end of it. You
Yeah.
just get, okay, we've slightly improved our research method,
Right.
brought it a little bit closer to the real experience, and now we can crack on with the testing, which will give us our sexy story to then go and actually,
Right.
make a superior
A better
product.
business decision, right?
Exactly.
Because again, that fragrance for that shampoo, it makes more sense when it's in bloom rather than neat sniff, right?
Yeah,
So even something as simple as that, and so what I mean by in bloom is mixed in warm water, so it's a little foamy, right? Which is quite different than just smelling the fragrance straight out of a jar. So
yeah,
here's a
yeah.
question for you.
Okay.
If you weren't working, because we were kind of talking about this before recording, if you weren't working in the sensory consumer industry, what
Yeah.
do you think you'd be doing?
Good question. I think that I would be, um, I honestly think I still have like this little bit of me that's like, oh, maybe I could just be like a full-time artist, just, do that, do something. I
What's
think
your
it would just
medium?
be, yeah, well, like sketching, painting, anything, mixed media, getting some sand, chucking it on things, like all
Nice.
of that. I think inside of me, there's a little bit of me that's like, maybe I could somehow just make that happen. I need to win the lottery first.
Yeah.
Uh, but I would still be researching. I would actually still be like your example of the person who was retired and still going to the conferences. Even if somehow I could do that, uh, I would be, I would still be, buying books to read in my spare time on sensory science, even if it wasn't something which was, uh, sort of letting me pay the bills at the end of the month. So I think
Right.
that's where you found the right thing,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. Definitely. Okay, so we're gonna play a game as we come to the
Okay.
close of this discussion, and the game is like
Okay.
free association. Catherine used to call it react attack. I just call it
Okay.
free association. I'm gonna give you 10 words.
Okay.
And for a little bit of context, you are in the process of moving right now. Where are you moving to?
I'm moving to New Zealand
Okay.
from my current home in the UK.
Big move. Very big move.
Big move. Big move.
So some of the words might have to do with that. Um,
Okay.
but I'm going to throw some random words at you, some from our discussion, and just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't think about it, just let it go. I could say blue, you could say potato. There's no wrong answers. All right,
Okay.
so here we go. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Innovation,
Exciting.
engineering,
Useful.
design,
Thrilling.
consumer,
Fascinating.
smell,
Oh, love.
sensory,
Oh, love even more.
kiwi,
The new me.
adaptation,
Oh, change.
transition.
Oh, you've said transition. I
Thank
just said
you.
change. Yeah. Today.
Opportunity.
Tomorrow.
So thank you so much, Tessa. This has been a really fun conversation, and I wish you the best in your move. It's very exciting. I've never been to New Zealand, so I hope to see tons of pictures. And we are
Thank
very
you so
excited to see what
much.
you do next. This has been a great conversation, and I've loved working with you over these years, and look forward to many more. So with
Thank
that,
you.
thank you very much. And we're going to close this up. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And join us for our next episode. This has been really fun. Thank you.